In this video, we're going to learn how to program a sampler, such as the NNXT sampler in Reason, but we're going to program it using our own samples. So Reason comes with a lot of sample libraries and patches for the samplers, but sometimes you want to make one of your own. So for example, I have a recorder, simple wind instrument that many of us learned how to play in elementary school, and I'd like to create a sampler patch of that. Well, the first thing you need to do is record yourself or someone playing that instrument, and this needs to be a pretty good quality recording in a low noise environment, because any noise or any extra stuff that gets into the recording is going to also be there in the samples. So when you try and play the notes on the keyboard, you're going to hear any other noise or interference that was there in the recording. So try to get these recordings as clean as possible and just play one note at a time. Here's the example of the one that I've done of the recorder. And I've gone in and recorded 5 different notes on the recorder. You don't need to do every note because the sampler can pitch things up or down to fill in all those gaps. And the more recordings you have, or the more sample files you have, the more RAM is used by that sampler patch. So if you can get away with less actual sampled recordings, then you'll have less RAM, and then that's more resources that can be made available for other parts of the work you're doing. To edit these samples, you're going to need a sample editor. And this is different from your MIDI sequencer or your multi-track audio editor. This needs to be a dedicated sample editor. In this case, I'm going to be showing you Wave Editor and Loop Editor, which are both programs from Audiophile Engineering. Another option on the Mac is Bias Peak, which is also a dedicated sample editor. On Windows, you're going to be looking for something like SoundForge from Sony, or you can do this in Adobe Audition. However, it doesn't. Its loop editing features in Audition are not quite fully set up to make the process really simple. So I think you'll spend a bit more time in Audition to get it right, but you can do this in Audition. What you're trying to do is isolate each one of these. So here is the recording I've done. The first thing I'm going to do is just save a copy of this. When you're working in sample editors, these are destructive editors, so they are actually going to be physically altering the source file, which is different from your multi-track editors such as Logic or Sonar. They hardly ever touch the original audio file. In that way, your original recording is always protected. In this case, we're going to be altering the actual audio, so we need to make a backup copy. So I'm going to save this as recorder samples _ working, because it's the one I'm working on right now. And now I'll edit this working one, and that way if I mess something up, I can always go back to the original recording. A very important step when working with a sample editor. The first thing I want to do is normalize this. When I recorded this, there's a bit of headroom here that doesn't need to be there, so I'll just go ahead and normalize. That'll bring everything up. We'll go ahead and leave all these different amplitude levels intact because that's how the instrument sounds. The lower notes on a recorder are quieter than the higher notes, so if we want our sampler patch to sound natural, having these different amplitude levels will really help. So here's our first one. I'll just start playing it here and you can hear what we have. Recorder, low C, low C, take 2, low C, take 3. Okay, there we go. So you can see it took me a few times to get the note to come out right. And you just need to do that. You need to make sure you're getting good, clean notes here. So I'm going to select that one note, which is our low C, and I'll just right-click on this and say copy to a new document. And now what I need to do is edit this down to as short of a thing as possible. I need to get rid of particularly this leading silence here, because if I leave that in there, then we'll have an audible gap in time from when you press the key on the keyboard and when the sound actually comes out, and you want that to be as instantaneous as possible. So I'll start by just kind of guessing here, and I'll just delete that part, and now we'll zoom in closer and see if I can get any tighter. Okay, so it looks like I could probably cut it there and not lose anything that I'm interested in. And then same thing here at the end. I'll just go and chop off the end of this. You know, the trimming of the end is less important, just because obviously once the note is done, you know, whether you've got silence at the end is not particularly relevant. So I think this is ready now. What I need to do now is also define the root pitch of this thing. So this is a note that has an actual pitch to it, and I can add a little bit of metadata to this file so the sampler will recognize that. And over here in the inspector, I have these MIDI options, and one of them is for bass note. Now this is a C, and this is going to be the C above middle C on the keyboard. Now depending on the scale you're working in, this is going to be, you're going to label this differently. In this case, Wave Editor has the lowest note as C-2, which in this case, the C we're interested in would be C4. Depending on the sample editor, they may reference these from different points. So like SoundForge starts at C0, in which case we would be a couple octaves higher than this. So in this case, it's C4. We should be fine there. You can also define a high note and a low note range. This would be the range of notes that this sample is going to cover, and the sampler will pitch it up or down in order to cover those. We'll just leave those as is, and we're going to program that manually in the sampler later. So once we have the bass note in there, we can now save this. If you're on a Mac, go ahead and save this as an AIFF file. The Mac is happier with that format, particularly with Reason. It'll read the metadata more easily. If you're on Windows, you'll save this as a wave. So this will be recorder low C. I'll save that. Close it. Now what I need to do is go over to this program Loop Editor so that I can set up the looping. So I'll get the file, I'll drag it into Loop Editor. And what I'm trying to do here is set this up so when I play it in the sampler, it will loop infinitely for as long as I have the note held down on the keyboard. And right now, this is obviously a finite length. You can hear it. Right? So if I want this to loop seamlessly, I just take these markers in here. And what you're looking for is you're looking for a range where you've got a similar amplitude all the way across. And you can see up here we have an overview, and then down here we have a zoomed in look at the loop point where it overlaps. There are some controls here. These arrows with the zeros next to them will lock us to a zero cross point. That's very important because if you have the loop happen where the wave is not at the zero cross, then you're going to get a pop. I'll see if I can demonstrate this. So I'll just offset this one and maybe offset this one a little bit. Now let's hear our loop. You can hear that little click at the loop point. That's because the wave isn't lining up, so it's creating this little vertical jump, and that's going to sound like like distortion. Basically, it's going to give you a lot of high frequency harmonic distortion. So if we hit the little zeros, it will lock these to a zero cross point. Now the other thing you're going to look for is in this overlap, you want to try to create an overlap that looks like a continuous wave, and right now it's not. You see, if the wave ends here, it would naturally go down again, and I've got it going up again. So I need to just jump this one more, and now it is doing a continuous wave. So if I preview this loop, we'll see what it sounds like. That's not bad. That sounds pretty good. So now that I have that, I'll just save the file, and now the sampler will use those loop points whenever we are playing this sample and keep the note held down. This is called the sustaining loop. And then when you release it, it will either continue to loop as it fades it out through the amplitude envelope, or it will stop looping and play it to the end for as long as the amplitude envelope allows. So you would then do that process for all of the samples, and you will end up with a folder full of samples just like this. and then we can go over to Reason and start programming these things. When you go into Reason, you'll make a new sampler, an NNXT sampler, and it will give you a default patch. In this case, it's just a piano. And what we need to do is just erase all this because we're going to make our own patch. So if you just right-click on the sampler, you can select Initialize Patch, and it empties out. Now, if I try and play any notes, nothing comes out because there's no samples loaded here. So let's load a sample. So we're going to click this little Load Sample button here, and we have to navigate to the folder where the samples are stored. And let's see, I want the recorder. And let's get our low C that we started with. There it is. So now it's loaded in, and it's created a zone for this, and you can see it's interpreted that root pitch that I put in there, that C4. So it knows what pitch this is supposed to be, and then it's able to pitch it up or down from there. So now if I play the different notes on the keyboard, you can hear it's pitching it up. Now, you get to a certain range, and it starts not sounding natural. So you've got to, realize that you can't. Well, although you technically can use one sample to cover all the notes, that doesn't always produce the best sounding results. In this case, because this is a pitched instrument, we need to tune it because we may want to play this along with other software instruments that would be in tune. And because this was a real instrument, it may not have been perfectly in tune, and so we just need to verify that and maybe adjust the tuning. And with the recorder in particular, unless you're a really skilled player, which I am not, it's really tough to keep those low notes in tune on the recorder. So we need to make sure that this is perfectly in tune. To do that, I'm going to load a second sample. And actually, before I do that, let me deselect that zone. It's very important because if you load a new sample with the zone selected, it just puts a new sample in that zone. And that's not what I want. I want to retain this zone with this recorder sample in it. So I'll deselect that, load a second sample, and I've made a sample of a 440 hertz tone. And that is an A on the keyboard. So I have that there. And what I'd like to do is set this up so it loops, because if I push it, you can hear that the tone drops out. So with the zone selected, I'll go down here to the play mode knob, and I'll turn this up so it says forward loop. There, now it's looping continuously, but you can hear that we're out of tune. They're not the same. So let's select the recorder now, and we'll try and tune it. So I'll hold this down. I'm going to adjust this little tuning knob, and it's just going to pitch the sample up or down to see if we can get it in tune. It's so far out of tune that I can't even get there. I can only do 50 cents tuning adjustment here. Let me change the root key. So I was playing a C, but it's coming out more like a C sharp. So let's see if I change this to a C sharp. Let's see what we end up with. Ah, that's pretty close. So now I just need to tune it slightly here. There we go. That sounds pretty good. Okay, so that one is now in tune, and now we can adjust its key range. So just for now, I'm going to take this and just isolate it into that C note that I know it's going to cover. And then we'll bring in another sample and we'll tune that one. So our next one is going to be the low E. There it is. And up against our tuning reference. Yeah, it's a little off too, isn't it? So let's see if we can fix it. Yeah, it's pretty far off too. Let me see. I might need to move this one up as well. So it's interesting because this particular note actually changes its pitch while it's going. So it starts out one way and then sort of settles in the loop. So again, that's a result of my poor recorder skills. So we'll just pay attention to the looped part of it, and we'll just assume that we'll just ignore the first part where it's not quite the same pitch. This is actually going to help it sound more natural. I mean, if everything was perfect, it would sound too mechanical. Okay, so that's about as close as I think we're going to get on that one. Let's go ahead and isolate that into the note that it's supposed to be covering. And we're just isolating here so that when we load in the new samples, we're not hearing more 3 samples at once as opposed to just 2. And then we'll adjust these ranges later. All right, so the next one is going to be the A. That's actually perfect. Perfectly in tune. Good. We don't have to do anything with that one. Next one is this. Let's see. The C. It's a little off. That's pretty close. This is a tough one because it seems to be shifting a bit as it loops. But that's pretty close. We'll leave it at that there. And obviously we could play with it all day. Now I just made a mistake that you should be aware of. When I was trying to adjust the range, I actually clicked in the key span area, and when I do that, look, it actually shifts the root pitch, which you don't want to do because we just spent all that time tuning this thing. So I'll hit Command Z to undo. And we'll make sure we grab the handle right at the end of there. There we go. Okay, and we have one more sample to load, which is going to be our high E. There it is. And let's see how in tune this one is. Actually, that's pretty good. I think that works. Okay, so now I can get rid of my tuning reference, my 440 hertz. So I'll just click on that. I'll right-click on there and say Delete Zone. And now I can go in and set this range. So when you're trying to decide the range of these things, obviously it depends on how many samples you actually recorded, but you also need to realize that pitching up is easier than pitching down from a sound quality perspective. So you want to err on the side of pitching things up. If you pitch them down too far, then they don't sound as natural. And some samplers are better or worse at the pitch shifting, and this one's pretty good at it. But you just need to realize that pitching too far down can cause you problems. So I'm going to go ahead and extend this down. I mean, the recorder can't really play a note lower than that C. But, because this is an electronic instrument, we can sort of extend the range a bit, and it'll still sound natural. And then, let's see. So my next one takes over there at that F. So I'll go ahead and bring this one up to that D sharp. And then this one can cover the E. And then our next one, which is the A, let's take that up to the G. And we just want to make sure that we're not missing anything. So everything is overlapping correctly. And that goes down to the B. And then we don't have any gaps, because otherwise you'll play the note and no sound will come out. And okay, so it looks like we've covered everything. I probably don't need to pitch that far. All right, now I have this. Let's see what it sounds like. right, that sounds all right. Now from here, we could do all kinds of things. We could adjust the amplitude envelope to create fade-ins or fade-outs if we wanted to. We could adjust, do some modulation to create a vibrato. We could make this recorder sort of do things that no real recorder could ever do. But this is a really good starting point from here. This, I think what I would do is try working with it in this form, and then if you need to make any tweaks, you could later. So once you have this and you like what you're hearing and you want to use it later, you can save it. So up here in the patch section for the sampler, there's a little save button. And you can save this. I've got one saved here as recorder.sxt, and that's the Reason sampler patch file. And you can load it up later if you want and use it in any project that you would like to use it for. All right, that is the end of the demo for the recorder. And the next video will cover programming the sampler to do a guitar sound. So look forward to that one.